Perhaps you'll remember that anecdote of the mullah, when one day when he was at the coffee shop and they were having a discussion about how do you know when someone is dead. And the discussion around the table had many mooted ideas about what it was, but one amongst them happened to be a funeral director. And he said, you know that someone's dead when they're stiff and they're cold. Well, as the mullah was going home, it happened to be snowing very heavily, and he slipped on the side of the road and fell into a ditch. And he got colder and colder and stiffer and stiffer. And so lying there, he thought to himself, I'm stiff and I'm cold, I must be dead. I better go home and tell my wife. So he climbed out of the ditch and went home and said to his wife, Wife, I'm dead. And then he went back to the ditch to lay down. And his wife started to wail, the mullah is dead, the mullah is dead. And the neighbors came from everywhere. How do you know? He came home and told me. And there's that man. He'd been poor all his life. Everything he ever started seemed to be doomed to fail. He could hardly make a subsistence living for himself and his family. But one day he was out in the forest gathering kindling to take to the market to sell, to earn a few kopecks to buy some bread for the table, when he noticed a black raven flying around his head or high up above him. And he had great fear in his heart, because of course the superstition was that the angel of death took many forms, and to him it seemed that this raven was just that. But it so happened that at a moment when he had stopped in a small clearing, that the raven came down and landed on a low branch nearby, and he began to quake in his boots and his shoes, thinking that the angel of death had come to get him. But just as these thoughts of fear were making him quake in his shoes, a great surge of courage rose up in him, and he said, "Who are you and what do you want with me?" And of course he wasn't at all surprised when the raven spoke back to him and said, "I am your misfortune. I am your bad luck." The man thought to himself, "Yes, I've never had any success in my life. Whatever it is I've started has been doomed to failure. How can I get rid of you?" He shouted to the black raven. And the black raven said, "It is a full moon. If you go home and leave your house now, every day that you delay, a part of me will remain with you, and I will be with you for the remainder of your days." The man hurried back to his house and told his wife what had transpired, and she said, "Let us go now." So they packed up their wagon with all of their goods and chattels, and they left their house. But they had not gone very far when their small boy cried for water, and they found that they had left their water flask in the house. Now the raven had said, "Be sure not to turn back, because if you do, I will be with you forever." So the man, remembering this, begged his wife, "We must go on, we must go on, we must not turn back." But the cries of her child were too great, and she demanded that he return for the water flask. So when they got back to their house and the man entered, there was the flask, and then a voice said, "Ah, so we are reunited. I will be with you forever." The voice was coming from the flask. But the man picked up the flask, took it out to the wagon, and told his wife, and their hearts were heavy and leaden. As they were driving along, the wife took the flask when they came to a forest and tossed it out into the trees, but in the blink of an eye it was back beside them on the seat of the wagon. But as they were coming to a bridge with a great raging river below, the wife said to the husband, "Stop the wagon." But she would not tell him why, in case it was told to the spirit in the flask. But she got out of the wagon and took a lot of pebbles, and she filled the flask with pebbles. And then, leaning over the bridge, she tossed it into the raging torrent, where it sank deep to the bottom of the raging waters. As they rode on in the wagon, they felt a lightness in their hearts, inexplicable. And as it happened, they came to the banks of another great river, where they set up a little hut, and the man became a fisherman. From the beginning, he had success. He caught more fish than the other fishermen who came down to this wealth and abundance, and he soon was able to make a good living for himself, even to give a little charity. But one day, when he was by the river casting his line, he caught a large white fish, and he thought to himself, "This fish I will not sell in the marketplace. I will keep for my family." When he took the fish home and they gutted the fish, inside they found a stone, a stone that glowed with a radiance that seemed to go in all directions. So the man thought to himself, I can make this stone into a lamp, and it will light our house. And so he did. But when he put the lamp on the window sill, it radiance going in all directions, lighting his house and the outside, they noticed that something was growing just outside the window. And in the days that followed, this grew to a great tree, a carob tree. They found that its fruit was so sweet they had known and tasted nothing like it. Very soon it was recognized by all that there was something special about the fruit of this tree. And so it came about that the man no longer had to be a fisherman. His wealth was derived from the fruit of the tree, and he was left to spend his life pondering on the wonder of God. From the experiences of your life, what are the deep meanings? What are the symbols? What are the representations that are so clear of the way stations depicted in this story? We've all had them. No one, no thing can avoid passing through the stations of existence and spirituality.